A German Shepherd puppy lay under wind-shattered boards until a U.S. Marine lifted each piece. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. He wasn't supposed to survive. That was the truth hiding beneath the wind-shattered boards, splintered and scattered across the yard like broken promises after the storm. The night had ripped through the small Montana town with a howl that felt almost personal, tearing shingles, snapping branches, hurling debris into corners where light rarely touched. And under one of those corners, beneath layers of warped lumber and dusted soil, something too small for this world lay still. The scent of wet cedar lingered in the chilled morning air, mingling with the faint metallic tang that always follows a hard wind. The boards shifted now and then as if breathing with the earth, but nothing beneath them stirred. No paw. No whimper. Only silence. The kind that makes the heart prepare for the worst. The puppy's fur, once soft with newness, was matted with wind-blown grit. His tiny chest rose so faintly it barely disturbed the dust on his whiskers. He looked like a fallen ember from a fire long gone out, warmth fading, hope thinning. Dawn crept across the horizon, its first light brushing gold over the wreckage. It touched the edge of one broken plank, then another, casting thin lines of brightness that tried, gently, to reach the life hidden underneath. A breeze passed over, carrying the clean, cold scent of the mountains. It whispered through the loose boards, lifting the smallest corner just enough to reveal a sliver of sable fur. Still no movement. Still no sound. If someone had walked past, they might have mistaken him for debris. A forgotten scrap of the storm's temper. But grace has a way of sending the right eyes at the right hour, long before anyone deserves such luck. And that morning, Staff Sergeant Luke Harlow happened to be crossing the yard, boots crunching through the damp grass, shoulders heavy from a night spent delivering blankets and checking on elderly neighbors. He wasn't looking for anything more than a moment to breathe. Yet something pulled his attention, a feeling, a nudge, the kind of quiet instinct Marines learn to trust because it has saved them more than logic ever has. He paused. Tilted his head. Listened. Not for sound exactly, but for a shift in the air. And there it was, a thin, fragile stillness that didn't belong. Luke stepped closer, brow tightening as he studied the rubble. His breath fogged faintly in the cool morning air. His gloved fingers brushed one of the top boards, the wood cold and damp beneath his palm. Something inside him whispered, "Lift it." So he did. Luke lifted the first board slowly, careful not to disturb whatever fragile thing might be hidden beneath. The wood groaned softly as it moved, releasing a breath of cold air that smelled like wet soil and cedar. He crouched lower, his shadow falling across the rubble as the morning sun edged higher, turning the debris into strips of pale gold and muted brown. Something in the silence urged him on, a quiet insistence that there was more beneath the surface than broken lumber. He slid his hand under the next plank, fingers brushing against grit and the chill left behind by the storm. Another lift. Another shift in the air. And then he saw it more clearly, the faintest curve of a tiny back, still as stone. Luke exhaled gently, as if afraid a louder breath might scatter the last thread of life lingering there. He whispered, almost to himself, "Easy now." He removed another piece, then another, each one lighter than the weight forming across his chest. A soft draft moved between the gaps, carrying the scent of pine needles and distant chimney smoke. The morning was warming slowly, but the cold lingering under the boards felt older, deeper. When the final plank slid aside, the puppy lay fully revealed, curled tight as if trying to disappear. His fur, a mix of sable and soft tan, was dusted and gray from the splinters around him. Luke watched for a rise of breath and caught it, barely. A small movement, like a leaf trembling on its stem. It was enough. He reached out one gloved hand, hovering just above the puppy's side. He did not touch yet. He simply waited. The wind eased for a moment, and in that hush the puppy made a faint sound, more exhale than whine, a fragile admission that he was still here. Luke's shoulders softened. "You held on," he murmured. He removed his glove, letting the warmer skin of his hand meet the cold air. His fingers brushed the puppy's fur gently, feeling the slight warmth beneath. The puppy flinched, but only the smallest amount, like a dream shifting rather than waking. Luke cupped his other hand around the tiny body, creating a shelter from the breeze. The sun reached them then, a thin band of light landing across the puppy's head. Luke lifted him carefully, cradling him against his chest. The warmth of the Marine's jacket enveloped the fragile creature instantly, and the puppy's tiny body responded with a slow, trembling inhale. Luke stood in the quiet yard, holding him close, the world around them still littered with broken pieces, but something in his arms no longer felt broken at all. He whispered, "I have got you," letting the words settle over the morning like a promise that neither the wind nor the storm could undo. Luke carried the small puppy toward his truck, each step slow and measured as if the morning itself might shatter if he moved too quickly. The cold air brushed against his face, but the warmth beneath his jacket where the puppy rested pressed through the layers like a fragile heartbeat tapping against his chest. The storm clouds were lifting now, pulling back to reveal a pale blue sky streaked with soft pink, the kind of gentle color that comes after a night that took more than it gave. He opened the truck door carefully, letting the heater hum to life before settling into the driver's seat with the puppy still tucked against him. The dashboard lights glowed faintly, reflecting off the glass and casting a warm amber tone onto the interior. The puppy stirred at the change in temperature, releasing a tiny sound that was neither fear nor strength, just a quiet acknowledgement that he was still here. Luke adjusted his jacket to wrap more securely around the little body. "You are doing good," he whispered, letting his voice fall into the cabin like a soft blanket. The engine rumbled to life, steady and reassuring. He drove slowly through the narrow streets of the town, passing mailboxes leaning from the wind and fences bowed under branches. The world looked tired, the way people look after trying too hard for too long. At a stop sign, the sun caught the puppy's fur through the windshield, revealing a delicate sheen beneath the dust and debris. Luke brushed a thumb gently across the small head, and for the first time, the puppy leaned into the touch, just enough to say he understood safety even if he did not yet trust it fully. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, a small building with a slanted roof and a single porch light that flickered softly in the morning air. Luke parked and paused before stepping out, letting the heater warm the puppy a little longer. He felt the faint rise and fall of breath against him, steadying at its own fragile pace. When he finally opened the door, the cold air swept back in, but this time he shielded the puppy with both hands, creating a quiet space where the wind could not reach. Gravel crunched under his boots as he walked toward the entrance. A bell chimed softly when he pushed open the door, releasing the gentle scent of antiseptic and pine cleaner. A woman behind the counter looked up, her expression softening as she saw the bundle in his arms. "We had a lot of storm rescues last night," she said gently. "But he looks very young." Luke nodded. "He held on longer than anyone should have had to." She motioned him through the swinging door toward the back room where warm lights glowed over stainless steel tables. The air was a little brighter there, a little kinder. Luke lowered the puppy onto a folded blanket, his hands lingering for a moment as if letting go too quickly might erase the fragile progress of the past hour. The puppy whimpered once, lifting his head the smallest amount as if searching for the warmth he had just lost. Luke rested one hand lightly beside him. "I am right here," he murmured, letting the words anchor the morning. And in the quiet that followed, the puppy's trembling eased, settling into a stillness that felt less like fear and more like the beginning of trust. The veterinarian entered with a calm steadiness, her footsteps soft against the tile as morning light filtered through the blinds in pale ribbons. She introduced herself as Dr. Ellen Ward, a woman with gentle eyes that held years of quiet resilience. She approached the table where the puppy lay curled on the blanket, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she understood instinctively that the smallest creature sometimes needed the slowest touch. Luke stepped back half a pace, but his presence stayed close, anchoring the room with a quiet responsibility. The puppy lifted his head the slightest amount, responding not to noise but to warmth returning in waves through the clinic air. Dr. Ward examined him carefully, her fingers brushing lightly along his tiny frame. She noted his heartbeat, faint but steady enough to hope for. She checked his paws, his ears, the subtle rise and fall of his small chest. Each detail told a story of struggle, but none of surrender. "He is cold," she murmured, "but he is fighting in his own way." Luke nodded, his hand still resting on the edge of the table. He held on all night. The wind must have pushed the boards over him, but he kept breathing. The doctor offered a soft smile, the kind that carried equal parts compassion and caution. "Sometimes the smallest ones surprise us." She prepared a warmed pad from a nearby cabinet and placed it gently beneath the puppy, allowing the heat to reach him slowly. When the warmth touched his belly, the puppy made a faint, trembling sound, somewhere between a sigh and a question. Luke leaned closer, his voice low. "It is all right, little one. You are safe." The room felt still, almost reverent, as if the storm outside had paused just long enough to let this moment settle. The soft hum of a heater filled the quiet, weaving through the air like a lullaby. The puppy blinked, his small lashes dusted with specks of dried dust, and for the first time his eyes opened a little wider, revealing deep shades of brown that shimmered with something more than instinct. Recognition, perhaps. Or the fragile beginning of trust. Dr. Ward mixed a small amount of warmed formula, placing a drop on her fingertip. She held it near the puppy's mouth, and after a hesitation that felt longer than it truly was, the puppy reached forward with a faint lick. It was tentative, unsure, but it was movement. It was life. Luke exhaled a breath he did not realize he had been holding. The morning light shifted again, touching the table with a soft glow. Dust motes drifted lazily through the warm air, catching the brightness as if celebrating the smallest victory. Dr. Ward nodded approvingly. "That is a good sign. He wants to stay with us." Luke placed his palm beside the puppy, letting the little body inch closer to the familiar warmth he had carried from the yard to the truck to this room. The puppy rested his chin on the side of Luke's hand, surrendering his weight with the quiet trust of someone who had decided, at last, that he was no longer alone. And in that stillness, surrounded by soft light and the scent of clean cotton, Luke felt something return to him as well, something he had not realized the storm had taken: hope. Dr. Ward adjusted the warm pad beneath the puppy, checking the temperature with the back of her hand before stepping aside to let him rest. The clinic lights were soft now, dimmed slightly as the morning brightened outside, creating a gentle glow that wrapped around the small room. Luke remained beside the table, one hand close enough for the puppy to sense without touching, offering presence without pressure. The puppy's breathing steadied into a slow rhythm, each inhale a bit deeper than the last. His tiny body absorbed the warmth, the tremble that had shaken through him earlier fading into a faint flutter. Luke watched the rise and fall of that fragile chest, feeling each movement echo inside his own. Dr. Ward returned with a small towel warmed in the microwave, folding it with care before placing it near the puppy's side. "He should have someone with him for the next couple of hours," she said. "He needs steady warmth and the reassurance that he is not alone." Luke nodded immediately. "I will stay." She smiled softly, as if she had expected that answer. "I thought you would." The scent of clean cotton and a hint of pine cleaner lingered in the air, calming in a way that made the room feel like a refuge rather than a clinic. The puppy shifted, reaching his nose toward Luke's hand, nudging it with a weak but intentional gesture. Luke's chest tightened at the small act of trust. He let his fingers rest lightly against the puppy's cheek, feeling the soft warmth beneath the dust. "You are doing just fine," he murmured. "Take your time. Outside, a breeze passed through the thin trees beyond the parking lot, sending a soft rustle across the windows. It was calmer now, the kind of morning that felt like an apology after a difficult night. Dr. Ward prepared a tiny syringe filled with more warmed formula, bringing it close. The puppy hesitated, then opened his mouth just enough to accept a few drops. They disappeared quickly, followed by a small effort to lift his head again. Luke steadied him with 2 fingers gently placed along his side, offering balance without forcing movement. The puppy leaned into the support instinctively, drawing strength from the steady presence he had come to recognize. "He is trying," Dr. Ward said. "That is a very good sign." Luke absorbed the words slowly, letting them settle with weight and meaning. The puppy blinked up at him again, eyes clearer now, no longer clouded by cold or fear. There was something in that gaze that felt like a thread forming, delicate but real. A connection quietly shaping itself between one life that had withstood a storm and another that had been shaped by storms of different kinds. Minutes passed in stillness, the kind that did not drag but soothed. The warmth, the soft hum of the heater, the steady presence of 2 people who cared enough to stay, all of it wove together into a cocoon of fragile possibility. When the puppy finally curled slightly closer to Luke's hand, resting the weight of his small head across Luke's fingers, it felt like a decision. A quiet choosing. And Luke, without speaking it aloud, chose him back. The hours passed with the slow patience of recovery, the kind that asked for quiet and presence rather than urgency. Luke stayed beside the small table, his hand never far from the puppy as Dr. Ward continued her gentle checks. The puppy's breathing had steadied, yet his strength flickered on and off like a distant light trying to find its way through fog. Outside the clinic windows, the last traces of the storm drifted overhead, leaving behind a sky washed clean, pale blue with streaks of white stretching toward the mountains. The calm after a restless night. Luke watched the puppy shift slightly, his tiny paws stretching in a fragile arc before settling again. Even the smallest movement felt significant, as if each subtle gesture announced he had chosen to keep fighting. Dr. Ward returned with a small stethoscope, placing it softly against the puppy's chest. She listened for several quiet seconds, her expression thoughtful, her posture still. Finally, she exhaled gently. "His heart is trying its best," she said. "But he is not out of danger yet. His body went through a long cold night. Sometimes the effects do not show until later." Luke nodded, his gaze steady on the small creature curled against the blanket. He understood the weight behind her words. In the military, he had learned that sometimes the real struggle came after the worst moment had already passed. The puppy opened his eyes again, the deep brown reflecting the soft overhead lights. His gaze drifted toward Luke, finding him easily, as if the Marine's presence had already become a reference point in a world that had shifted too many times in too few hours. Luke lowered his hand until his fingertips barely brushed the fur on the puppy's side. "I am right here," he whispered. "Storm is over now." The puppy's chest rose in a trembling inhale, followed by a faint exhale that sounded almost like relief. Dr. Ward gave Luke a warm compress wrapped in a towel. "Keep this near him. It will help keep his temperature stable." Luke accepted it, placing it beside the puppy, who instinctively curled closer. The warmth seemed to settle him, softening the tension in his small frame. Minutes slipped by, measured not by clocks but by the gentle rhythm of breath in the quiet room. The heater hummed, the lights glowed steady and low, and every so often the wind outside brushed against the building as if checking in before moving on. Then, without warning, the puppy's body tightened for a moment, a small tremor running through him. His breathing hitched, shallow and uneven. Luke leaned forward instantly, his hand hovering above the small chest without touching, as if afraid any pressure might disturb the fragile balance. Dr. Ward moved quickly but calmly, adjusting the warm pad, checking his temperature again. "This happens when their bodies are trying to regulate warmth after cold exposure," she said. "Stay with him. Let him know he is not alone." Luke's voice dropped to a low murmur, steady as a heartbeat. You made it through the storm. Stay with us now. The puppy's trembling slowed, then eased. His breathing deepened slightly, and his tiny head shifted until it rested once again in the cradle of Luke's fingers. A fragile trust returning in small, quiet waves. Luke watched him settle, his own breath releasing with a quiet steadiness. The moment held, gentle and fragile, the kind of moment that did not announce itself as victory but felt like one just the same. The subtle tremor that had passed through the puppy faded into a softer stillness, the kind that felt less like weakness and more like surrendering to safety. Luke kept his hand near him, palm open, offering warmth without expectation. The clinic room had grown quieter as the morning settled, the soft hum of equipment blending with the occasional creak of the building adjusting after the storm. Dr. Ward stepped out to prepare additional supplies, leaving Luke and the puppy in a gentle calm that felt suspended between worry and hope. The puppy shifted, inching his small body closer to the warm compress and the comforting shape of Luke's hand. His tiny nose brushed against the Marine's fingertips, releasing a faint sigh that sounded almost like contentment. Luke lowered his voice to a quiet murmur. "You are doing well, little one. Stay with us." The light outside brightened, stretching across the room in thin beams that warmed the edge of the table. Dust floated gently in the glow, catching the light like small drifting sparks. The puppy blinked slowly, his eyelids heavy but no longer weighted by fear. He nudged his head deeper into the cradle of Luke's hand, and Luke's breath caught, not from fear this time but from the unmistakable sign that the small creature recognized him as a safe place. When Dr. Ward returned, she carried a small device to check the puppy's temperature again. She leaned in carefully, smiling at the sight of the puppy curled so trustfully beside Luke. "He is responding to you. That helps more than you know." Luke glanced up, a quiet sincerity passing through his expression. "He has been fighting all night. He just needed someone to lift the last bit for him." She nodded gently, adjusting the reading. "His body temperature is rising. Not fast, but steady. That means he is beginning to regulate warmth again." They both watched the puppy breathe. A tiny rise. A tiny fall. A rhythm slowly finding its way back. The moment felt fragile, sacred even. Luke brushed a thumb across the puppy's fur, clearing away a few lingering flecks of dust. "We will get you through this," he whispered. "One small step at a time." The puppy's ear twitched at the sound, a delicate movement that revealed a spark of life beneath the exhaustion. Dr. Ward prepared another small drop of formula, warming it and bringing it close. The puppy hesitated, then reached forward with a soft determination that had not been there before. He accepted the drops, each one followed by a tiny swallow. Luke steadied him with his palm, feeling the faint strength returning bit by bit. When the feeding was finished, the puppy rested his chin on Luke's fingers again, breathing deeper now, a soft warmth radiating from his small frame. Outside, the sun climbed a little higher, casting long, gentle rays through the window, touching the puppy's fur with a golden shimmer. It felt like a blessing, quiet and unannounced. Luke let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that did not feel empty but full of possibility. The storm had taken much, but here, in this small room, life was choosing to stay. And Luke stayed with it. The puppy's small breaths continued in their gentle rhythm as the afternoon light shifted across the room, creating soft patches of gold on the tiled floor. Luke kept his hand close, the warmth of his palm offering a steady comfort the puppy had come to lean into. Each rise of that tiny chest felt like a quiet victory, fragile and precious. Dr. Ward checked on him periodically, her steps soft, her voice barely above a whisper as she updated Luke on small improvements. Yet beneath her calm tone was a caution, a reminder that recovery sometimes walked a thin line. The puppy stirred, his ear flicking as if responding to some sound only he could hear. His eyes drifted open and settled on Luke with a depth that did not belong to such a young creature. There was gratitude there, but also a plea, a silent request for him not to step away. Luke's voice dropped to a murmur. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. For a moment, the puppy's breathing steadied even more, as though the reassurance had found its way inside him. Then, without warning, his breath shifted, becoming quicker and shallower, as if his small lungs were struggling against something unseen. The warmth of the room felt the same, the light unchanged, yet the air around the table seemed to tighten. Luke leaned forward, keeping his movements calm, his hand lightly touching the puppy's side without applying pressure. Dr. Ward approached quietly, her expression attentive but controlled. She did not rush. She did not alarm. She simply adjusted the warm pad, checked the puppy's temperature again, and lifted one of his small paws gently. Sometimes, she said softly, their bodies remember the cold even after they have left it. The puppy's breaths fluttered, uneven, like a candle flickering in a draft. Luke kept his presence steady, his voice a low hum meant only for the tiny creature before him. Stay with us. You are safe. Breathe slow with me. The room fell into a deep stillness, broken only by the soft hum of the heater and the faint ticking of a wall clock. The puppy's eyes drifted halfway closed, not from fear, but from exhaustion. His head tilted slightly to the side, leaning toward Luke's hand as if seeking an anchor. Dr. Ward monitored him closely, her voice reassuring. This is a response to stress and the long cold exposure. It does not mean he is giving up. He just needs help through this moment. Luke nodded, though his jaw tensed. He knew what it meant to fight past the hardest part after a long night. He had lived that kind of struggle more than once. He lowered his hand until his palm cradled the puppy's side fully, letting his warmth spread in slow, steady waves. The puppy's breathing hitched once, then steadied just a little. Not strong. Not certain. But present. A fragile thread holding on. The sunlight outside dimmed as the afternoon clouds drifted in, casting a muted light across the room. In that softened glow, the puppy's small body relaxed just enough to ease the trembling in his paws. Luke whispered, almost inaudible, "You have made it this far. Do not stop now." The moment felt suspended, delicate as glass, uncertain as a breath held too long. It was the kind of moment where miracles either found their opening or slipped away quietly into the folds of time. And all Luke could do was stay, steady and unbroken, until the puppy decided which path to choose. The light in the clinic softened as the afternoon wore on, turning the room into a quiet cocoon where every breath, every small shift of air felt amplified. The puppy's breathing hovered in that fragile place between struggle and surrender, the uneven rhythm a reminder of how much he had endured. Luke stayed close, his hand steady against the puppy's side, offering the grounding warmth the tiny creature kept reaching for. Dr. Ward monitored from nearby, giving them space yet remaining attentive, her eyes reading every small movement with practiced care. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the puppy's breaths grew thinner, each inhale softer than the last, as if the cold hours under the broken boards had finally caught up to him. His small body relaxed in a way that felt less like rest and more like a quiet letting go. Luke leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Stay with us, little one. You have come so far. For a moment, the puppy did not respond. His tiny chest stilled in a pause that stretched too long, a silence that filled the room with a weight Luke felt deep in his ribs. Dr. Ward stepped nearer, placing a hand gently over the warm compress. She checked the puppy's temperature again, her brow softening with a quiet grief that needed no explanation. The world outside seemed to fade, the sounds of cars, distant birds, even the hum of the heater blending into a muted hush. Luke felt the stillness, the heartbreaking quiet that came after hope had been stretched thin. He lowered his head, letting his forehead rest near the puppy, close enough to share his breath. You are not alone, he murmured, the words steady but faint. I am right here. A long second passed. Then another. And then, as if summoned by the warmth of the marine's breath or the gentle persistence of a heart refusing to give up, the puppy's tiny body twitched. Just once. A small spark of movement, almost like a shiver awakening from deep inside. Luke lifted his head, eyes fixed on the fragile rise beneath his palm. The puppy inhaled, a thin, trembling breath, but unmistakably a breath. Dr. Ward paused, leaning closer, her voice gentle and firm. There it is. He is still fighting. The puppy's eyes opened the slightest amount, the deep brown catching a sliver of light. His nose nudged weakly toward Luke's hand, the faintest gesture of recognition returning like a fragile blessing. Luke felt something break open inside him, something quiet and profound. Good boy, he whispered. I am right here. Keep breathing with me. The puppy's next inhale came a little fuller, followed by a slow exhale that warmed Luke's fingers. His trembling eased, settling into a small but steady rhythm. It was not strong. It was not certain. But it was life reclaiming its place. The kind of miracle that arrives without sound, without ceremony, like a tiny ember glowing back to life under careful hands. The puppy nestled closer to Luke's warmth, choosing hope again. And Luke stayed there, holding the moment as gently as the creature who had just taken his first step back toward the world. The puppy's breathing settled into a gentler rhythm, each inhale no longer a trembling struggle but a quiet claiming of the space around him. The smallest glow of warmth returned to his body, spreading beneath his fur like the first hint of dawn pushing against the horizon. Luke stayed close, his hand resting beside the tiny creature, offering the steady presence the puppy kept leaning into. Dr. Ward stepped back for a moment, giving them room to breathe in the fragile peace that had formed in the clinic. The storm outside had long passed, but its memory clung to the edges of the day, softened now by the golden light that pooled across the floor. The puppy shifted, lifting his head just enough for his chin to brush against Luke's palm. His eyes, still heavy from exhaustion, blinked open with a slow clarity that had not been there before. He looked at Luke as if seeing him for the first time without the haze of fear or cold wrapped around him. Luke's voice dropped to a warm murmur. There you go. You stay right here with us. The puppy released a tiny sound, something between a sigh and a soft hum of recognition. Dr. Ward returned with a small dish of warmed formula, setting it gently on the table. We can see if he is ready for a little more, she said softly. Luke steadied the puppy with his hand as the doctor offered a few drops from a small syringe. This time, the puppy accepted them with a stronger effort, his tongue reaching forward with a faint but determined rhythm. Each swallow felt like a triumph, a step away from the edge he had been balancing on. That is a very good sign, Dr. Ward said, her smile warming the room even more. The puppy's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, then settled again as his head lowered to rest fully in the cradle of Luke's fingers. Luke brushed a thumb across his fur, clearing away a tiny fleck of dust. You are tougher than you look, he murmured. The heater hummed softly in the background, its warm breeze drifting across the table in gentle waves. The puppy's body absorbed it slowly, his paws relaxing, his breathing evening out until it matched the calm energy of the room. For the first time since he had been found, there was no sudden gasp, no stutter in his breath, no trembling cut short by exhaustion. Only steadiness. Only life warming its way back into him. Outside, a soft breeze moved through the trees, rustling the last of the storm's remnants into the distance. The sunlight brightened the puppy's fur, revealing hints of rich sable beneath the lighter patches, a sign of the healthy coat waiting to grow in. Dr. Ward stepped closer again, checking the puppy gently. His heart sounds stronger, she said. He is not out of the woods, but this is the kind of progress that matters. Luke let the words settle over him like a blessing he had not expected to receive. The puppy curled closer, pressing the weight of his tiny body against Luke's hand in a gesture not born from desperation but from choice. A small, quiet choosing. The Marine stayed still, letting the moment unfold at its own fragile pace. The world outside continued on, the sun rising toward its afternoon peak, but in the small clinic room, time seemed to slow for one heartbeat, then another, giving space for a miracle to take root. And in that gentle warmth, the puppy breathed a little deeper, as if finally believing he belonged in the light returning around him. The late afternoon light softened into a mellow gold that drifted across the clinic room, settling gently over the puppy as he rested against the warm blanket. His breathing, once thin and uncertain, now held a steadier cadence, rising and falling with the quiet determination of a life finding its rhythm again. Luke stayed beside him, his presence calm and unwavering, as if the fragile heartbeat before him was guiding his own. Dr. Ward moved quietly around the room, preparing a small set of supplies for the next stage of the puppy's care. Her footsteps were soft, respectful of the stillness that had formed around the table, a stillness filled not with fear but with the first notes of recovery. The puppy lifted his head, not in struggle but in curiosity, his dark eyes settling on Luke with a faint glimmer of awareness. It was subtle, a recognition that did not need sound or movement to be understood. Luke smiled softly, brushing a gentle hand behind the puppy's ear. "You are looking better," he murmured. "That is what I wanted to see." The puppy responded by nudging his nose into the warmth of Luke's palm, an action that carried the quiet sweetness of trust-growing roots. Dr. Ward approached, observing the small but meaningful exchange. "Bonding like that," she said softly, "is something medicine cannot create. It helps in ways we cannot measure with equipment." Luke nodded, still focused on the puppy. "He has a lot of spirit for someone this small." She smiled. "Most miracles do." She placed a small bowl of warmed formula on the corner of the table. The puppy lifted his head again, this time with more intention, sniffing at the air as if drawn toward the gentle scent. Luke steadied him carefully, guiding him without pressure. The puppy leaned forward and began to drink, slow at first, then with growing confidence. Each small swallow felt like a triumph, a declaration that he was not simply surviving but participating in his own healing. When he finished, he settled back down, curling his tiny legs beneath him as he nestled into the blanket. His eyelids fluttered with the peaceful heaviness of a creature safe enough to rest without fear. Luke let his hand rest beside him, close enough for the puppy to feel but not restricting his movement. The warmth between them felt like a bridge, carrying the quiet understanding that they were now connected by more than circumstance. Outside the window, the breeze rustled gently through the trees, carrying away the remnants of the storm. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering delicate patterns across the floor that shifted slowly as the wind moved. Dr. Ward finished her notes and placed the clipboard aside. "He is stabilizing," she said with quiet satisfaction. "He will need monitoring, warmth, and care, but he has passed the worst of it." Luke exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding, the relief subtle but deep. The puppy stretched his tiny paws, releasing a soft sound before settling back against Luke's hand, choosing warmth, choosing safety, choosing life. In that small, gentle moment, something unspoken settled between them, something that felt like the beginning of a promise neither of them needed words to understand. Evening settled gently over the small clinic, drawing long shadows across the floor as the last notes of daylight lingered at the windows. The air had grown warmer, softer, carrying the calm that often follows a day spent fighting for something fragile. The puppy rested curled against the blanket, his tiny breath steady and warm, no longer pulled thin by fear. Luke remained beside him, his posture relaxed for the first time since the storm had led him to that broken corner of the yard. The room felt quieter now, not from absence, but from a peace that had slowly unfolded around them. Dr. Ward entered with a chart in her hand, though she paused before speaking, letting her eyes take in the sight of the small creature nestled trustfully against the Marine's hand. "He is stabilizing beautifully," she said, her voice soft. "His temperature is holding, and his heartbeat is strong for a puppy his size." Luke nodded, the relief settling deeper in his chest. "He has more fight in him than most full-grown dogs I have known." She smiled, gently adjusting the edge of the blanket. "Sometimes the smallest lives carry the quietest strength." The puppy stirred, lifting his head just enough for his nose to nuzzle Luke's palm. The touch was light, deliberate, as though he were offering a wordless thank you. Luke's fingers brushed his fur with a tenderness that surprised even him. "You are safe now," he whispered. "No more cold nights. No more hiding." The puppy released a soft sound, warm and content, before resting his head fully against Luke's hand. Outside, the world continued its slow return to order. The breeze had lost its sharpness, carrying instead the faint scent of pine and damp earth. A few scattered leaves drifted across the sidewalk, catching the amber glow of the streetlights. Dr. Ward finished her check and set the chart aside. "He will be ready to go home soon," she said. "But he will need someone patient. Someone steady." Luke looked at her, though his hand never left the puppy. "I can do that." She nodded once, as if she had known his answer long before she asked. "He chose you long before either of you walked through that door." The puppy shifted closer, his body warming under the gentle clinic lights. Luke leaned down slightly, letting his forehead hover near the tiny creature. A quiet moment passed between them, unspoken but defined, a moment stitched together from shared breath and the healing that had begun in the darkest hour of the storm. The bond forming between them felt less like an accident and more like a thread woven from grace itself, as if the broken boards had concealed not just a life waiting to be rescued, but a purpose waiting to be revealed. The puppy's breathing deepened, his small body rising and falling in a slow, confident rhythm, every breath a testament to the strength that had carried him through the night. Luke let his hand rest lightly along the puppy's side, steady and warm. In the quiet glow of the clinic, the marine and the fragile life he had rescued simply existed together, bound by something gentle, something enduring, something that felt very much like the beginning of healing for them both. Night settled softly over the small town, the kind of night that carried no memory of the storm that had torn through the streets just a day before. The clinic lights glowed warm against the dark, casting a gentle halo across the quiet parking lot. Inside, the air was calm, wrapped in a peace that seemed to grow from the tiny heartbeat resting against the blanket. The puppy slept deeply, his breathing steady, his small body curled into a shape that spoke of safety rather than fear. Luke watched him with the quiet reverence of someone witnessing a miracle unfold in its simplest form. Dr. Ward finished her final checks for the evening, her smile soft as she observed how naturally the puppy sought the marine's presence even in sleep. "He will heal," she said gently. "Not just survive. Heal." Luke nodded, letting the words sink into the space around them. His hand rested lightly along the puppy's side, feeling each breath rise with quiet confidence. It was a stark contrast to the trembling he had felt earlier in the day, when each inhale had seemed to hang by a thread. The shift was small, humble, but profoundly real. Outside, a cool breeze stirred the branches, brushing faint shadows across the window. The moon appeared through a break in the clouds, its soft silver glow adding a quiet holiness to the moment. The puppy stirred, stretching a tiny paw before scooting himself closer to Luke, guided not by fear but by comfort. Luke could not help the small smile that formed. "You have a home now," he whispered. "And you will not face the cold alone again." Dr. Ward dimmed the lights, leaving just enough brightness to cast a soft glow around the table. "You can take him home tomorrow," she said. "He is ready for warmth, gentle care, and someone who understands how to carry a fragile life until it becomes strong." Luke looked down at the small creature who had fought so fiercely for breath just hours ago. "I can do that," he said quietly. "I will give him everything he needs." The puppy shifted once more, his head finding the cradle of Luke's palm with a familiarity that felt older than a single day. It felt like recognition, like choosing, like the quiet beginning of a bond shaped not by circumstance but by something deeper. The room settled into a peaceful stillness, the kind that leaves space for gratitude without needing words. Luke breathed it in, letting the weight of the day melt away. The storm, the shattered boards, the desperate fight for one more breath, it all drifted behind them, softened by the miracle resting beneath his hand. The puppy released a small sigh, warm and content, as though letting the world know that he had chosen to stay. Luke closed his eyes briefly, letting the moment anchor itself quietly inside him. Faith does not always arrive in loud declarations or shining signs. Sometimes it comes in the form of a tiny heartbeat, steadying under a warm hand. Sometimes it is a fragile life choosing to trust again. And in the gentle hush of that clinic room, framed by moonlight and the soft breath of a rescued soul, faith felt real enough to touch.